What did you find out about your wife or husband only after you got married? My husband is night terror, and it's really the only time he's ever straight up mean to me. Otherwise, he's incredibly sweet and caring. It took me about a year or two to figure out how to handle the night terrors. I tried playing along at first. Usually it was visions of spiders raining down on him from the ceiling, and I'd try to help swatting them away. But he'd get furious and shout, "You're not doing it right," and then roll over in a huff. I tried turning on the lights and showing him there was no spiders, but he'd get furious that I didn't understand or see them. Keep in mind, he had very little recollection of any of these ongoings the next morning. And when he has them, I just push him back down to the bed and say, "No," very firmly, and that puts the kibosh on it for some reason. One of my favorites was when I woke up to him jumping up on the bed in terror, holding onto the wall and headboard for dear life, exclaiming, "There's a lobster in the bed." This was before I really knew how to handle the night terrors. I turned on the lights and peeled back the sheets, exposing no lobsters, and very calmly talked him off the ledge. It took almost 10 minutes of cajoling and lobster-free reassurances before he would lay back down. I later surmised that our cat most likely nibbled at his foot in his sleep, since he usually lets her gnaw at his feet during the day. She's a toe biter. Another one I like happened when I had come home from my friend's house one night. It was in bed, sleeping already. I was in the bathroom off her bedroom brushing my teeth. I hear him start talking quietly and moving around, and I pause. The cat flees the bed like a bat. I'm thinking maybe he just pushed her off and she got mad. I go back to brushing my teeth and hear him go, "Yay, yay." I peek out into the room and he's sitting up staring at me. "We've got to land this plane now." I tell him okay, lays back down and is asleep within seconds. Apparently the cat didn't want to help land the plane. Sounds like he's got some repression issues, maybe. Story 2. Before I got married, I dated a woman who I thought was the one. When we began living together, she developed a habit of insisting on having all the pillows. It wasn't a matter of just keeping a few for herself or having enough to be comfortable. She wanted every single pillow. Initially, I thought it was just a quirk. She liked big plush pillows while I preferred a flat one, which seemed reasonable enough. To accommodate her, I went out to Bed Bath & Beyond and bought several more pillows. I liked her, enjoyed our time together, and found our physical relationship satisfying, so I was willing to be accommodating. I handed over the pillows, thinking that would be the end of it. However, that night she started trying to take my one flat, slightly worn pillow, the one I was used to. I asked if there was a specific kind of pillow she preferred, hoping to solve the problem. She told me she liked a particular style, so off I went to Bed Bath & Beyond again for a few more pillows of that type. Despite having 8 pillows in her possession, she continued to try and wrest my one pillow away from me each night. I asked if I snored and suggested I could buy a different pillow to help her sleep better. She agreed, so I went back to the store for even more pillows. We eventually had 10 pillows, plus my own. Each night I'd find a new pillow to use, only for her to pull it away and add it to her growing pillow fortress. Even when I hid my pillow in the closet, she sought it out. She ended up creating a chaotic, uncomfortable iron throne of pillows on her side of the bed, with corners sticking out and making her restless. Despite the number of pillows, she remained unsatisfied and uncomfortable, as though no amount could ever be enough. I told her plainly, "I have one pillow, not 0 pillows. If I wake up and have none, we're done." She never took my pillow after that, but we soon ended a relationship. Her parting shot was, "If you loved me, you'd give me your pillow." I genuinely liked her and was attracted to her, but in retrospect, I realized how lucky I was to escape the situation. I shudder to think what it would have been like had we stayed together, especially if we had more resources. Her behavior suggested a deep-seated need to control and take everything to feel secure, which extended beyond pillows. For instance, I noticed that she would take most of the ice cream from the tub, despite her small size. Looking back, I'm not sure why I tolerated it for as long as I did. Perhaps there were other factors at play that kept me invested. However, years later, I came across a piece of wisdom from the Dalai Lama. Not getting what you want is sometimes a remarkable stroke of good luck. That insight has helped me appreciate that sometimes. What seems like a setback is actually a fortunate turn of events. Sounds like he had some serious pillow talk. Story 3. I found out my husband leaves everything open. So every drawer, door, cabinet that he opens will stay open. He also found out I'm even clumsier than he thought, and on my way to close one cabinet or drawer, I'll definitely strike my head in an open cabinet or trip over a drawer. Now he only leaves a few cabinets open at a time. Progress. My husband literally leaves everything open that can be opened, including, but not limited to, DVD cases, shampoo bottles, browser tabs, toilet seats, and even his fly. I'm also the clumsiest person I've ever heard of. If I close my eyes, I will fall over. Fortunately, we live in a single-story home because growing up, I used to fall down the stairs about once a month, and I would fall up the stairs once a week. All this being said, he's very sweet and catches me whenever I fall over. He puts his hand over my head whenever I stand up so I don't strike anything, and he moves anything slippery or trippable out of the way. Story 4. Obligatory not after marriage, but after moving in together. I would wake up early for work and tickle one of his feet. It would snatch it back under the cover quickly and then slowly push it back to its spot, peeking out from under the blanket. I thought this was a cute game we played whenever I was leaving for work, and I did it every morning for almost 2 years. And one day after I had moved in, I did it to him while he was awake, and he gave me a confused look and asked, "What are you doing?" I told him I was just trying to play our morning tickle game, and he had absolutely no clue what I was talking about. Turns out he's only ticklish when he's sleeping, and I was unknowingly playing a game alone for almost 2 years. I would stay the night at his place frequently before we took the leap to actually get a place of our own. Now we're happily married, and I still frequently attempt to tickle him. Story 5. I literally only discovered this the moment we were married, that he has a very romantic side. All the time we were together before, I probably would have said I would have liked a little more traditional romance. But I appreciated how straightforward and pragmatic he was about other things and thought I can't have it both ways. I could add that he's a theoretical physicist who works with engineers and he has the personality to match. He always said he thought marriage was essentially meaningless. Eventually, for external reasons, we decided to do it. I proposed to him, by the way, with a new watch. We threw together a cheap little ceremony in a few weeks to get it over with, as we both put it. He put on a suit, I put on my pretty dress. We had the officiant there that I found on Yelp 2 weeks before and got started. However, when it came time for the vows and the ring exchange, I suddenly found myself facing a very sentimental man who was clearly deeply in love with me and overjoyed to be marrying me. After that, the same man who took years to feel comfortable holding my hand in public for even 5 minutes was hugging and kissing me in front of everyone at every moment he could during the ceremony. Then he wanted to celebrate every week anniversary, then every month anniversary, the romantic dinners and having the same cake we had at our wedding. He starts celebrating at 12:01 a.m. on our anniversaries. He gazes lovingly at his wedding ring and always wants me to do the Wonder Twins thing with him by clicking our rings together. Who'd think it? Story 6. He has a really hairy like a mustache, but he has relatively sparse body hair everywhere else. We tried to wax it once. I'd leftover wax, Sally Hansen Brazilian if anyone was wondering, from doing it myself and didn't want it to take up cabinet space, so I talked him into letting me wax him. By the way, we didn't have to trim it or buzz it since it gets scratchy when the stubs come in. I hate shaving my legs or girl parts for this very reason. The hairs were too long for my epilator. This is like an electric tweezer that does the job of plucking all the hair out without the messy wax, and I imagined it would hurt a lot more. We did his knuckles and legs, and he didn't think it was too bad, and one thing led to another. We decided to take a look at his. It was weird. Like, why was it mustache-y? Anyway, I dusted him with baby powder. This way the wax doesn't stick to his skin, and applied the hot wax. I probably should have trimmed it at least with scissors first because too much hair and the hair wins. The wax gets peeled off the paper as you're stripping it off, so all the pain and none of the reward. Of course, he's screaming and freaking out from the pain, and I start laughing hysterically. I'm someone who has that thing where you don't have the right reaction sometimes, and most of the time, if I'm scared or nervous, I start laughing uncontrollably. This gets really weird, which was why I hesitated to type it out. I have to apply more wax because once the wax on his hair has touched another surface and then peels off, it loses its stickiness. It's a huge mess at this point too. So I try to get ice since it would numb the skin and make it hurt less. I don't have ice in the freezer, but what I do have is a bag of individually packed frozen tuna from Costco. We eventually got all the wax and hair off. I never tried it again, and I still can't bring myself to buy packaged frozen tuna from Costco, which I used to enjoy using to make tuna tataki. Story 7. I'd known that he'd mentally struggled throughout his life, but about 5 months after the wedding, it really struck hard. We just bought a car because he'd been doing well at his first full-time job. The stress of needing to work or else crashed down so that I had to stop completely. He couldn't drive to work because he'd shake. Every morning around 4 a.m., he'd wake up to try to go to work and I'd stop him. We'd sit in the dark until he calmed down enough to play a video game for a while. These would happen around 5 times a day. They've dissipated since he formally left the job, and we decided that my income was technically enough. I had no idea that it could be that severe, and I wish I could take them away from him, at least so that he could get more out of life. Since we decided he won't work outside of home, we'd started a family, and he'll soon be a stay-at-home dad for our son. Instead of filling my husband with terror, I've never seen him so excited and confident in himself. Story 8. My sister found out 3 years into our relationship that Her husband used to be an NFL wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. She thought he just played league football casually with his friends. They were sitting around watching a football game on TV, and he knew really specific details about certain players. She asked how he knew all this, and he said he was pretty good friends with them. The conversation kept going, and he finally confessed to playing in the NFL with him. His family would never talk about it either. She would be over at his house, and his sister told her that his college games were pretty fun to go to. She never brought up that he was a star wide receiver playing in front of 70,000 people. Well, she obviously wasn't a football fan. Story 9. He has an infuriating habit of throwing things away that shouldn't be thrown away. He's an extremely clean person, and I love that about him, but he takes it overboard. For example, we'll have a half tub of butter and see another tub at the store that's on sale for a decent price, so we will buy the butter that's on sale. Well, instead of using up the half tub of butter at home, he'll just throw it away and open the new one. He does this not just with butter, but with every single food item you can think of. He also throws away things that, in my opinion, are very important, but in his opinion are causing clutter, which she gets super anxious about. He has thrown away a DVD collection, our lease, brand new clothes that myself or my kids haven't worn yet, and so in his mind never get worn, blankets, towels, shoes, etc. I tried to set up a box for him to throw everything into instead of the garbage, so that way I can pull things out that I actually want, and then donate the other things to charity. But that didn't last long. He literally threw the box away because it was in the way. Also learned when we got a dog that he's terrified to scold the dog for any reason, or raise his voice around it, because he's convinced the dog won't like him if he does those things. And that thought is devastating to him. Unfortunately, my husband is probably the sweetest, kindest person you could ever hope to meet, so it makes it really hard to stay angry at him for any reason. Story 10. Not just after getting married, but after being together almost 18 years. One night we went to dinner at a friend's house. They're making pizzas, which we don't often do. My wife offers to help. Grabs some dough and starts spinning it on her fists like a pro, tossing it high in the air with a confident flourish. I had no idea. I mean, I knew she did some time at a Little Caesars as a teenager, but I guess I assumed they just pressed the dough into pans there. I didn't ask and she never brought it up. Turns out it's an attractive skill for a lady to have. Confronted her about the they don't hand toss at Little Caesars problem. Apparently, she and her coworkers would get bored enough between rushes to hide in the walk-in and play with the dough, a not significant portion of which ended up behind the shelves. Anyhow, this was a frequent enough occurrence that they eventually developed some skills. The curious downtime habits of the pre-cell phone era. Story 11. My wife turned out to be a bank robber. When we were dating, she told me she had saved up money from working summer jobs and babysitting while in high school. I thought, wow, she's responsible. We got married, and shortly after, we set off for our honeymoon. On the way, as we're cruising down the highway, she turns to me and proceeds to tell me that she didn't actually save up the money for her honeymoon from part-time jobs like she said she had. My heart skips a beat. She had saved up over 10 times the amount she'd claimed. I figured we'd got the jackpot. So we went on an extravagant, at least by my standards, honeymoon. For an entire week, we lived like royalty. We did it all. Visited every museum, ate at the fanciest restaurants, rented boats, saw every show in town. It didn't matter what it was. If we liked it, we bought it. A $500 location-branded souvenir? Sure, why not? By the end of the trip, we had spent an additional $6,500, and I wasn't even worried. Then we got home. It was a Sunday afternoon, and we both had to return to work the next morning. When we walked in, we noticed the answering machine was blinking with several messages. This was back in 2000, before we had cell phones. We played the first couple of messages, but then the third or fourth one caught our attention. It was from her boss at the bank where she worked, asking her to call him immediately. He sounded serious and left his number. At this point, I'm still unaware, but by Monday morning, everything had unraveled. I learned that there was no magical high school savings account. None of the money she had told me about came from part-time jobs. Instead, she had been regularly transferring money from a couple of large customer accounts at the bank into her own account. The total amount? Worth of $7,700. The bank was livid. The clients were furious and the authorities were already into investigating the whole thing. Let me tell you, those investigators were intimidating, and I quickly realized this was way bigger than I had ever imagined. After several stressful meetings with the bank, it was decided that if we made full restitution, they wouldn't press felony charges. That was a relief, but now we had a big problem. My wife was jobless and unemployable. Meanwhile, I was desperately trying to figure out how to pay back the $7,700 in full, and fast, to avoid legal consequences. I felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. We scraped together every penny we had left from the honeymoon, borrowed $500 from my parents, $5,500 for mine and added my next paycheck into the mix. I had to ask my parents to help pay back money my new wife had stolen from a bank. But by the end of the week, we managed to pay the bank in full. Weeks passed, and things began to calm down. She got a job, thanks to some strings I pulled with manager friends, and we started the slow process of paying back our families. We didn't hear much about the situation for a while, and the immediacy of the crime seemed to fade into the background. We even started to believe we might be in the clear. Then, in 2002, 2 years after, we were contacted and summoned to the court. We were still pretty young and naive at the time, so we got extremely lucky. The federal authorities were surprisingly reasonable, and since the bank had been fully reimbursed, they didn't push for heavy charges. It was a small-town bank after all, and they seemed more interested in moving on than dragging things out. We took advice from the bank's representative, and honestly, at that point, we were willing to do anything to put this behind us. So she went into court without a lawyer, pleaded guilty, and the judge gave her 2 years of probation. There was also the stipulation that she could never work at an FDIC-insured establishment again, which, given everything that happened, seemed like a light punishment. And this is how my life as a married man began. Story 12. She can be super accommodating. She left her work to come stay with me, adjusted to my lifestyle like a champ. She has been a constant pillar of support when I've been down. I can only hope it matched her contributions to our relationship. I've been really lucky. I moved to the US for my master's and completed a PhD. Later on, got married during the PhD days, living literally below poverty line with stipend. My wife has a master's in IT from my home country, began work right after studies, up until a few months before she moved to the US to stay with me. The dependent visa won't allow for her to have an SSN, let alone work here. We had a tough time getting her a driving license. She has battled through months of helplessness, where I could only give a shoulder for random unexplained crying bursts. Fast forward to the present. I'm employed but do not make nearly as much as I should. There were no jobs in my field when I graduated and took up whatever was available, besides adding to my experience scale anyway. We're content but not satisfied. We're happy. I've often told her that I probably would not have moved to stay with her and sacrificed my career for it, but she did. That really is the power of a relationship. Indeed. Anyways, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 13. Not me, but my great-grandfather. He got married again in his 70s to a woman in her 60s. Everyone in the family didn't like her, but my grandpa's old and she makes him happy, so everyone plays along. 8 years into the marriage, my ancestor approaches my father, who has learned a trade and knows some bookkeeping. Some stuff about money. Grandpa starts asking these questions like, how much household money do you give your wife each month? Turns out my father was being taken for a pretty penny. This woman received hundreds of marks back in the day without carrying any of the expenses, and she bunkered it all. Apparently, she had snuggled up to the next rich dude at a senior's resort and had banked on my grandpa passing away from old age before that. The genes run strong in my family, and the old coot just wouldn't cooperate in that front. So my grandfather got a divorce in his mid-80s by a female judge. This was the early 90s. My great-grandmother, not biologically related, learned a thing or two about my grandpa, such as he was so fed up with what she was doing that he was willing to go to prison just to be rid of her. That's how deep his dislike ran. The judge, at first, didn't want them to get divorced and condemned to pass away lonely, so my grandpa threatened to harm his wife in front of the judge if she didn't do it. The judge was furious and told him he'd be going to prison for the rest of his days if he did that. My grandpa, God bless his soul, told her that he had survived World War I, sleeping on the remains of former schoolmates and eating nothing but rotten bread for weeks. The thought of a warm jail cell with a radio and 3 meals a day, all for free, did not scare him at all. You'd be doing me a favor, Judge Lady. The whole point of this is that my family can still inherit some money from me before this takes it all, and by sending me to the big house, you'd actually make the state pay for my every expense and my burial. Do not tempt me in this. I'm starting to like the idea. Is what he told her. I'd say my great-grandmother learned a thing or two about the sweet old man she had been married to for 8 years that day. Story 14. He loves me, not just parts of me. My husband could care less about what I do with my life as long as I'm happy. Stay home with a baby? Sure. Work full-time? No problem. Have no kids? No worries. Have 8 kids? Sure. Move out of the country? Sure. Buzz cut your hair? Sure. Gain 50 pounds? Sure. Lose 50 pounds? Sure. Adopt 10 dogs? Sure. Change religion? Sure. Get a PhD? Sure. I already have my bachelor's, but I don't think he would care if I was a high school dropout. I can't think of a single thing that I would want to do that my husband wouldn't be supportive of. He's practical, so some things would need planning and compromise, but he would work hard to make whatever is important to me into a reality. No matter how much I change, I have no doubt that he's there for me and loves that version of me just as much as the previous version. Our relationship is built on mutual respect and trying to make sure each other's needs are fulfilled. I make sure he's happy, he makes sure I'm happy. We both encourage each other to do what fulfills us and work towards our goals. Story 15. My first husband shared that he had a kid before we met, which I don't have a problem with because I love kids, and that there was a paternity test proving it and a court order from the state for him to pay child support, which he hadn't paid in 8 years. Yep, that marriage ended in divorce. It was one of many things pointing to serious character flaws with him. During our divorce, all he cared about was getting out of having to pay child support for a daughter, so I didn't even ask for it. His history showed he wouldn't pay it anyway, but I did ask for custody, which I was awarded. It felt that he got off footloose and fancy-free and boasted to our friends for years about it. Our daughter is now in high school and has blocked him on Facebook and on her phone. Sure, after our divorce, he would come into her life once in a while and take her to a theme park or out to dinner, but a kid needs a father, and he was never that for her. Instead, she got to watch him drink and behave like a grade school during her visits with him. She stopped wanting to go to his house because of it, and I didn't force her. He drove around in a new car, bragging about his $65,000 income, with a wallet stuffed with $100 bills, which she went without and had to wear secondhand clothes. My parents eventually did help a lot, helping her to get braces and educational support, things I couldn't afford as a single mom. Though I think that only made him feel like he really didn't need to do anything, since her grandparents would do it. He lived a fast, partying and drinking life for several years and went through some relationships. He has a drinking problem and he's alone and lonely. But now her daughter wants nothing to do with him. I just can't seem to figure out why. He has asked me on occasion, but my daughter has asked me not to talk to him about it, so I didn't. She did try to talk to him about it once, but then he got defensive and told her that all she cared about was money. He didn't understand that was a lie. The money was only a symptom of a bigger problem. If you want to know what's in a person's heart, check their wallet and their calendar. A person invests into the things that are important to them. He did not invest in our daughter. I didn't have much money or even time as a single mom, but the money and time I did have were invested in our daughter. If she only cared about money, she would be angry at me as well, considering the countless times we had top ramen and eggs for dinner. I feel bad for him sometimes, because he really doesn't get it. But most of the time I feel like he made his bed and now he gets to lay in it. It's his roost. These are his chickens. I see his posts on Facebook. Just the other day, there was a post that said, "In 4 words, write the scariest story you can." And he answered, "You are the father." He only sees kids as burdens. She has become a wonderful young adult, very responsible, independent, and smart. She's engaged now, has a great start to her career and has thousands in savings already, and is planning her future. Any sensible man would be lucky and proud to have her as a daughter. I'm now remarried and my current husband cares for her very much. He invests in her because he loves me, so he loves her too. He helps her without hesitation, without being asked. She gave him a card on Father's Day stating how thankful she is that he's in her life, that any man can be a father, but not every father is a dad, and thanking him for being like a dad to her. It brought tears to his eyes. We don't plan to have children because of our age. We need to save for retirement, but he's eagerly looking forward to being a grandpa to my daughter's children someday. I can't imagine someone feeling that this is a burden. We're not lonely. Our home is not empty, it's full of love. Story 16. Not married, but engaged. She has a very warped view of what she does around the house versus what I do. About once a month, she will make a comment about me not contributing. I handle all the yard work, clear the roof, replace the air conditioner filters in our crawl space, do 90% of the shopping, do all the sweeping, which our 2 dogs shed a lot. These fights generally happen around the time that she's doing laundry all night because she neglected it for a while. The deal when we moved in together was that I handle the floors or yard, she handles laundry. Also, every time we cook, she claims to have done all the cooking, which drives me nuts. I do all the chopping and prep, but she normally takes over once the stove is involved. One thing that I learned about myself is that I need alone time every day. I'm pretty introverted, and she's an extrovert, so when I get home from work, I just want to sit and browse Reddit for a while. Luckily, she recognizes that and completely understands. Story 17. That he really was as messy as people tried to warn me about. I thought it was just because he worked so much that he never had time to pick up after himself. His car was always a pig pen with bottles and trash just tossed everywhere. When we started dating, he always kept my side clean and the back picked up more. Same for his room. He started to pick up more, so I thought it was just because he was single and worked 2 jobs, one being full-time. His family and friends warned me of how messy he was, but it didn't click because I saw it differently. Well, as soon as we moved in together, I was wrong, and his family and friends were right. He was only less messy because of me. When we started living together, he gradually became more relaxed and ended up messy again. In our 10 years of marriage, I found a way to contain his mess to only one area, which is his room. He keeps the mess out of the main living area and tries his hardest to keep other areas picked up. I do have to remind him from time to time, especially with his dirty clothes, but over the years he has gotten a lot better. But boy, did it cause many frustrations in the beginning. Story 18. Hobby is a hoarder. I actually didn't realize it until about 6 years of marriage. I thought I was just lazy about throwing stuff away. One day I went in and cleaned his office, threw away old receipts, magazines, and a mini disc player, and he freaked out. He pulled it all out of the trash and had to look at every single thing. I managed to convince him to throw away most of it since it was actual trash, but he wouldn't throw the mini disc player away even though he hadn't used it once since we met 15 years ago. Plus, he has an iPod now for music. I should have picked up on it earlier because he gets upset whenever I tidy up a public space like the kitchen island. At the time, I just thought it was annoying that he'd get mad at me for cleaning up his stuff instead of thanking me. Luckily, he has a bit of a sense of humor about it and I can joke with him. No one is perfect, and it is something we work on. Story 19. I married my husband after knowing him for 6 months. We celebrated our 2-year anniversary last month. Smooth sailing so far. But there would obviously be a lot of things we learned about each other as we went on. Mostly tiny quirks, like that he hates dill pickles and dresses light for the winter, that he likes Magic the Gathering, pretends Friends is dumb but laughs at the jokes when I'm watching it on Netflix. All the major things we knew about each other already, childhoods, recent history, life goals, etc. He got really tipsy a little while ago. Truth serum tipsy. I crawled into bed and I couldn't sleep, so I figured I'd ask some questions because I'd never seen someone truth serum tipsy before, and it seemed like a waste to let it go. Only I couldn't think of anything to ask him that I didn't already know. Do you love me? Of course I love you, baby. Aw. What don't I know about him? I guess I don't know what his favorite color is. What's your favorite color? I don't have a favorite color. Well, I guess that explains why I don't know what his favorite color is. After that, he pulled me to him and we fell asleep. Story 20. We married young and for nearly 25 years before she passed away after a long illness. I miss her a lot. We had an LDR and after our wedding, moved in together for the first time sharing a bed with anyone. I went into the marriage with an open mind and no expectations other than monogamy and partnership, and that worked out well. Some things I learned. Her dad was a gypsy she had not seen since she was 8. I learned her whole father's side of the family was wanted by the FBI, ran carnivals and various scams up and down the East Coast, and she was entranced by the culture even though we never met them or interacted with them, ever. The only times we found out her father was still alive was when he tried to claim her as a child dependent on his taxes. She was 26 at the time. She was born on Christmas Day and was really bitter about it. Like, she never got over it in her 43 years of life. She was miserable because no one remembered it, despite calls from friends, me and our son celebrating it, a huge point of contention about the holiday that actually got worse as she got older. She had thick, long, curly hair that shed in huge quantities, but her hair never thinned or looked bad. Just long hair everywhere. She's been gone for 2.5 years and I'm still finding it. No concept of cleaning. None. Hated it. I find it cathartic, so that worked out well. But it was so frustrating because of how messy she was. If she made grilled cheese, for instance, I'd find the pan on the stove. Cheese still on the counter, bread bag open, cabinet doors not closed, greasy spatula, cheese wrappers, etc. I'd make one. And in the time it took to cook, I'd put away clean dishes, put dirty ones in the dishwasher, wipe down the stove and counters, and put away stuff. After I cooked, the kitchen was much cleaner than when I started. It amazed her. She had a natural leadership ability she didn't seem to understand or notice. She worked a lot in sci-fi and anime conventions with me. And whenever she was in charge of something, that was the it place to be. She ran art shows, staff suites, even ran KatsuCon for a year, and people just gravitated to her. She was a self-made matriarch. She could have been in politics if she didn't have crippling self-doubt and blindness to her amazing organizational skills. She'd wear clothes until they were literally falling apart. I had to be the one secretly throwing away clothes, underwear, and socks because I did the laundry. When she passed away at 43, we donated clothes she still had since she was a teenager in various drawers and closets. Story 21. My husband was convinced that he was a neat freak. The whole time we were dating, he was living in someone's summer home just to keep a presence there while they were in their real home. So I didn't get to see him really in his own living conditions. I also like to be very clean, so I figured it would be perfect. At least we wouldn't have those kinds of arguments. After a few months of being married, I realized there was no getting around it. He wasn't a neat freak in the slightest. He left a trail of clothes and items all throughout the house, like a slug with its slime trail. He did no cleaning. He refused to put away laundry. I finally confronted him and asked him why he told me he was a neat freak when he obviously wasn't. He just looked at me confused, finally reaching a moment of clarity. I really did think I was a neat freak, but I guess it was just the substance. Story 22. Apparently, sleepovers were something totally foreign to him. I grew up sleeping over at friends' homes and then coming to mine all the time. As an adult, I figured when we had kids we could get a break every so often with a sleepover. Turns out he's super against them, like not even letting our kids sleep in my parents' home. He explained it as a Hispanic thing. I had no clue at all this was something people in his community didn't do. Turns out that yes, in some Hispanic communities, sleepovers are taboo. But that's because most of the family live under one roof. But of course, my parents live in their own home. We fought about it a few times because I couldn't understand why he was so against our kids sleeping over at their grandparents' home. I never even knew my grandparents and wished I was given the chance my kids now have to hang out with them. We eventually compromised and allowed our kids to stay with my parents every so often, but sleeping at a friend's home is not allowed. Story 23. My partner's old school was having a fundraising day, so we volunteered to help. There had been an accident in the nearby motorway, so loads of people were being delayed. The hired clown was running a few minutes late, so a teacher asked if someone could fill in for 2 or 3 minutes. I stepped up and did a few minutes of juggling tricks. When I finished, she looked very confused and said that I never told her that I could do that. So I replied, "You never asked." Then a bit later, one of the bands was also running late, so I volunteered to play the guitar and sing a few Disney songs and get the kids to join in. She was genuinely furious when I got off the stage. When she asked why I didn't tell her I could play the guitar, she did not find it amusing when I replied, again, that she never asked. I get home 2 hours earlier than her every day, so I use most of that time to practice a hobby in her attic, an official man cave, which she never goes into, so there's a few things I'm alright at that she has no idea about. It might seem odd not to tell her, but she's a bit sensitive about the fact that I have 2 extra free hours than she does, and I know she'd be annoyed if she knew I was having fun while she was traveling, so she's under the impression that I spend most of that time cooking and cleaning. Story 24. That she gets vertigo and has a fear of heights because of it. Didn't find that out until after we'd been married for 11 plus years. I'd gone a consulting gig in Denver and was traveling back home every weekend, but one weekend she visited with the kids instead. I was showing her my corporate apartment in the 30th floor of my building, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a great view of the mountains, and she wouldn't come any closer than 5 or 6 feet away from the window. On another weekend, a few months later, we went for a drive in Rocky Mountain, NP, and there are some sheer drop-offs next to those mountain roads. I was driving, she was on the passenger side. She kept telling me to move the car more to the left, even though I was nearly straddling the center line as it was. Story 25. That her apartment was only clean when I came by. Now that we live together, I've realized she's a clutterbug like her mom and dad. She really can't clean even when she tries. Nothing is physically keeping her from doing it. I just think she never really learned. What would take me an hour to clean up and organize takes her 4 hours and isn't organized at all. She recently cleaned our kitchen cupboards and basically just stacked all sorts of them on top of each other so all the dishes fit in 3 cabinets instead of 5. I've been living with this fiasco in the kitchen for a month now because I don't have the heart to tell her it looks and functions terribly. She was very proud of herself. Finally, she can leave a mess in every room of the house for months on end, but if I leave a mess, it's a huge problem within a day. I guess to her it's just not messy. Story 26. I'll answer the corollary question. My wife found out that I had slowly become an atheist over the course of 3 years. We'd been dating for 4 years, went to church together, and kinda was your typical cultural Christian people. Then after the 4th year, I started slowly figuring out that she didn't really find out that I was a full-blown atheist until a year into our marriage. It pretty much came out when we were discussing the creation story. I really don't know how that conversation started, but I ended up saying that it's all BS. The Earth is 4 billion years old, evolution, etc., etc. Moses didn't exist, and the Old Testament is nothing but Jewish mythology about an angry war god. The conversation ended with her crying, but fast forward 2 more years and now she's an atheist too. Some people wise up to all the religious BS at younger ages, but my wife and I had to wait till our late 30s before we started questioning it all. Essentially, I went first, then she followed suit. But it was a hard month thereafter she learned of my deconversion, because in her mind she married an atheist, which for some reason is equated to bad worshipping, and the honeymoon phase of our marriage was halted for a couple months. We're 3 years married now and we are living like honeymooners all over again. I was one of the lucky ones. My wife chose love over self-righteous judgment. She did what Jesus would do. And for that, even though we aren't Christians anymore, we are more Christian than we've ever been. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.